Here's something most practices never think to track. A patient can sit through a clinically excellent consultation and still walk out without moving forward. Not because the treatment plan is wrong, not necessarily because of price, but because their body never received the signal that it was safe enough to fully process the conversation and make a decision. Welcome back to the Business of Aesthetics podcast. I'm your host, Don Adeesha, and joining me today is Dr. Keira Barr. Dr. Barr is a double board certified dermatologist, somatic trauma specialist, author, educator, and the founder of the Center for Mind Skin Medicine. She has spent more than 20 years examining the connection between the nervous system, the skin, emotional well-being, and the patient experience. Today, we are exploring why a rushed examination room can quietly undermine trust, what a nervous patient may be communicating before they ever say, "Let me think about it," and how practices can build a more nervous system informed patient experience without disrupting the entire schedule. This episode is brought to you by Echo Marketing. Dr. Barr, welcome to the Business of Aesthetics podcast.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Now, Dr. Barr, you have spent years looking at how the nervous system responds to a room, a provider, and even a diagnosis. Was there a particular moment when you realized that a consultation could go clinically perfect and still fall apart, not because of the treatment plan, but because of what was happening inside of the patient's body?
Yeah, before my own health fell apart and I started having to do this work, no, I wouldn't have known. I would have thought that it was something, maybe outside of what was happening in the exam room, right? Rather than the communication and connection between. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons to learn is that you can give a perfectly wonderful explanation, break it down, give them all the information that they need. But what we don't realize is that outside our conscious awareness, our nervous system is always asking one singular question. Am I safe? Is this life-threatening? Do I need to, go into protection mode? And if the answer is this isn't safe, that person's nervous system shifts state and goes into more survival physiology right during that conversation. And you can see it happen if you know what to look for.
Right. So talk to us a little bit about this survival physiology. What is it and why do we not want to get there?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is, you might wonder, why does this matter for skin or aesthetics or anything like that? And I think it really goes back to the science, right? Yes, we're talking about the business of things, but why this kind of threat detection system is so important for the business of aesthetics is that the nervous system and the skin are intimately connected, embryologically linked. So in utero, right, these tissues, these organs were formed from the very same layer of tissue. So they've been communicating with each other in utero, and that communication never stops. So for instance, if you're talking to a client or, during a consultation, and you notice that they start to flush, or while you're talking to that client, all excited about the latest and greatest, and you want to make a good impression, but your palms are sweaty, your pits are sweaty, that is your nervous system state becoming visible on the surface. That is real-time mind-skin connection. Yeah. And that's not a problem, but it's letting you know that your nervous system has shifted into what we call a mobilized state. The sympathetic nervous system has turned on, that fight or flight response. Yeah. Mm. And so I think it's just, we can feel it in ourselves first. And I think that's what helps make this feel real. So we can maybe notice it a little sooner in the person sitting in front of us.
Now, you mentioned earlier on that a patient considers whether if a treatment is safe, or rather, am I safe from this treatment? Is this life-threatening? If we are aware of that in the consultation room, or rather, is this something that you always need to address in the consultation room, irregardless, or is it only when you notice they're breathing a bit, or perhaps your own, as you mentioned, palms are a bit sweaty. You're seeing your skin might be feeling that tension first before your mind catches on to it.
Right, exactly. So goosebumps, the flush, the warmth, that's kind of letting you know things have already happened. But I would say it needs to happen every single time and before you even walk into the room. Yeah. Because um, how a nervous system, before it takes in what you're saying, it's taking in your quality of presence. A nervous system stuff. I mean, we're talking about nervous system. This seems like very abstract, but right, we engage in relationship all the time. There are certain people when you walk in the room, you felt a sense of ease. You're like, oh, that's my person, that's my vibe, versus someone you feel a little bit high alert, right? What's the difference? What is the difference in the way that their body language is, how the pace or the prosody, the sing-song quality of their voice, right? How their gaze is. These are all things, all cues that our nervous system is picking up all the time. We've all been doing it our entire lives, right? But it makes a
Right.
really big difference in the consultation room because I presented at the Aesthetic World Congress about trauma and the exam room. Yeah. And I was really surprised to come across the statistics across multiple studies. Upwards of 90% of individuals seeking aesthetic procedures have a history of trauma. And trauma isn't in a singular event per se. Trauma is how an experience um, impacts our capacity to adapt, right? We're wired to adapt to stress. But if a stressor is overwhelming to our system, we can't bounce back as easily, right? We shift into this fight or flight, this survival physiology, and we can oftentimes
Mm.
get stuck there. So when we talk about is something safe or unsafe, it doesn't, it's not always you, the individual, it's does your presence, the way you're standing, the voice, the pace, the maybe the sense of felt pressure, does it feel
Mm.
like, smell like, sound like something from their past that now is reactivating something inside that exam room with you, right? So we have to be
Mm.
very mindful of that because why are people coming for an aesthetic procedure? There's something about themselves that they want to maybe enhance or they have shame about. It's a very vulnerable experience. So when, yeah, go ahead.
No,
I
no,
was
no,
just
please continue.
I was just going to say that when we are approaching our consultations, a potential client, they're already feeling something about themselves that might need to be fixed. Yeah. So if we can approach them from a sense of like, there's nothing about you that needs to be fixed. How is this impacting you? So that they feel seen, they feel understood, right? Because why, especially the individuals who keep coming back for multiple procedures, despite technically, chef's kiss results, um, that is not vanity oftentimes. That is survival biology of trying to feel safe in a visible body in a society and culture where the beauty normative standards are like this flawless appearance, right? So it's just this way of trying to feel safe in a body that maybe earlier in their life had been criticized, judged, ashamed. So when they come into your room, it's really important to create a environment where they have a different experience than they've had before.
I love that. I love that. And it frames I mean, it frames a lot of what we do in the aesthetics industry perfectly, right? Because we deal with confidence, I feel like, right? A lot of that comes down to all these treatments, since they're elective, comes down to a treatment of confidence in one way or another. And what you just framed there, 90% who are coming in for those treatments have experienced trauma of some sort. Makes sense. It's surprising, definitely, but interestingly enough, it makes sense.
It does make sense. And so much of trauma happens in relationship, right? In childhood, where maybe we were told to buck it up, suck it up, don't cry, don't talk, make yourself small, right? And so, what is happening inside a consultation room? That's a relational dynamic, right?
Hmm.
So, we have an opportunity. Dr. Dan Siegel shared his work was not based on aesthetics, but he said that healing happens in relationship when people feel safe, seen, soothed, and secure. Yeah. Which means that when someone's coming to you with a very vulnerable like ask, they feel like there's something to fix about themselves. Helping them feel safe, soothed, seen, and secure doesn't mean that you have to magically like overhaul your entire practice, but it means that you need to check in with your own nervous system first. Are you feeling harried or rushed? Can you place a hand on your chest and just slow things down for 30 seconds? Take a deep breath. So when you enter that room, you can be a calming presence because that person is probably already feeling nervous or worried. And we come into this world not knowing how to regulate ourselves. We always have been, wired to borrow the anchored and grounded nervous system of another. And that client, when she comes into your office, that is what they or he, she, they, whoever is coming into your office, that's their expectation that you're going to be able to hold them, that you're going to give them that certainty to help them feel held and seen. And if that is missing, right,
Hmm.
that survival physiology is going to get turned on.
Okay. Now, let's talk a little bit about some signals that we can see from across the table, right? So when someone's nervous system begins moving into alarm mode during the consultation, what does that actually look like from a provider's perspective? What are some of the commonly missed signals before the patient ever says, let me think about it?
Yeah. So alarm doesn't always look anxious. Oftentimes it does, right? Maybe their breath can be shallow. Maybe you're noticing they are a little bit tense. Maybe their shoulders are up to their ears. They're apologizing repeatedly, excessive reassurance seeking. That could be kind of that fight or flight response, that sympathetic nervous response. But when that, if we don't feel like we can fight, we can get away, the next level of survival physiology is to slow things down and to conserve energy in service of our survival, right? We need to like almost how a possum plays possum, plays dead. We slow things down. So someone who has gone into alarm mode may all of a sudden become very quiet or looking around. Their affect has become a little bit more flat. Yeah. So it doesn't always have to look hyper.
Mm,
Actually may look like they've kind of disconnected, maybe withdrawn. It may feel like
mm,
you're feeling a resistance
mm.
in the experience,
They seem disengaged.
disengaged, disconnected.
Right, right. So during a moment, or rather, I think there were a couple of examples over there, if you don't mind. What can we do for each of those examples when we see them excessively apologizing or seeking excessive reassurance, or when they're disengaged? I think those are like three different examples. I would love to hear how we
Yeah,
can approach those three.
I think number one is when you notice it, first check in with you, right? Ground
Oh,
yourself first, right? because it's this relational field, right? So if you can check in with yourself, you're going to be able to hold a little bit more space for the other person. So first, just check in with yourself, maybe take a breath, and then even name it. Like, hey, like I'm noticing, right, that maybe you're looks like you might be. I know I'm noticing, or you can even start with yourself. Like, I notice I'm holding my breath a little bit as we're talking about this, feeling the energy is amping up a little bit. I just want to check in with you. How are you doing? Right? I mean, it doesn't have to be very scripted, but I think not bringing attention to it to shame anyone, but just even bringing awareness of like, do we need to slow things down a little bit? Right? Is this making sense? Do you have any questions? If they're already asking excessive questions, what about this is feeling concerning to you? But like trying to get under the question. What are they really worried about? What is the
Mm,
assurance that they're really hoping that you can provide? So
mm,
I think the most important thing is to be curious, to be really
mm,
curious, not jump to conclusions, but trying to understand what is happening for this person. First, let me see what's happening inside of me. Am I feeling amped up? Am I feeling anxious? Is my pace going a little bit faster? And if you can slow yourself down, then check in with them. Maybe even offer, hey, I feel like we've gone a little off track here. Maybe we just take a breath together and we can keep going.
I like that. Um, Being curious and trying to get under the question. Now, sometimes, I mean, this is a subject matter that requires a bit of soothing, right? We can be a bit brash at times, right? What's the problem? Well, right? Like we can just be straight up like, okay, because honestly, we're all tight for time, right? Although it's a consultation, it's booked, that's booked off, but still we are trying to ensure we get to the close as quick as possible and try to ram through whatever barriers they might be having. Why why is that a problem? Or is that a great tactic? I don't know. Dr. Barr, weigh in on this.
I think it really depends on the individual, right? What is the dynamic? There are some people who come in and be like, tell it to me straight. This is what I need to know. Don't mess around. Great. They've already demonstrated what their communication style is. They just tell me what to do. I'll do it. Great. Easy, right? But we're talking about when it's that, someone may have a lot of concerns and worries, and understandably so. And
Mm,
so that tactic won't work as well. So instead of like,
mm,
what do you need to fix is, also for better outcomes, right? If someone is constantly reassuring, no matter how much reassurance, they may still be dissatisfied. And really, word of mouth and referrals is really important. You want someone to be satisfied. So again, curiosity comes into play here, right? If you were to do this procedure, what is the outcome that you hope to achieve? What
mm,
is the transformation that they are really looking for? If they are saying, this is the thing, if I do this, my life's going to be completely different, my relationships will be amazing, that could be a little bit of a potential red flag too, right? Because injection of a filler or a laser isn't going to be able to solve those real problems. And I think it's really important to know that up front and ahead of time. And you only can find out that information is if you ask questions and you be curious, right? What about
mm,
this? What is it about this particular procedure that is of interest to you? What is it that you hope will become possible after you have this done? And
mm.
it can give you some clues about, okay, well, how do I need to communicate the benefits of this and the value of this to this person? Or is this absolutely not the right time, not the right treatment? Is this not a client that I actually want to proceed with?
Okay. Now, I would like to build on that answer, right? When we talk about that rushed examination room, um, how can those conditions push a patient towards shutting down, even when that person arrived genuinely interested in the treatment?
Yeah. I think there's a few different reasons. I think this really speaks to therapeutic presence, right? They came in genuinely excited. And again, if there's any moment during that interaction, if they don't feel safe, they don't feel seen, they don't feel secure, they don't feel soothed, right? That survival physiology may get activated. So I think it always begins with the provider of making, and it doesn't mean it's going to have to derail the visit or take a lot of extra time, but checking in with your breath, your pace, the eye contact, what's happening with them, and again, being curious if things seem to have gone sideways, just checking like, hey, I'm noticing there's been a little shift. What's Did something shift for you, right? And they can say, well, when you said this, it made me feel X, or I don't understand. I got lost in that description. And it just provides an opportunity for increased communication, because that's what this is all about. This is a relational dynamic, and relationships can be nuanced, and oftentimes in the aesthetic relationship, there's an opportunity to help create a different experience, a positive, different experience for someone who may have had years or decades where they didn't have that support, right? So being in that exam room creates a beautiful opportunity, not that you have to be their therapist, but you can create a felt sense of presence for them that helps them feel differently, like supported in something that's very vulnerable for them.
Opportunity for increased communication, right? I really like that line over there. And because earlier on, you also mentioned that a lot of the trauma that you found out uh, was coming from trauma in relationship, right? Trauma in relationship, what I can genuinely understand from that is there a lot of miscommunication must have gone down for that to happen, right? So you're almost treating that, but of course you're not. But at the same time, why not? And here's my question here, right? Safe, seen, and secure. I've heard these over and over and over and over in a lot of our conversations. But soothe, pretty new to me. Why is that important? What do you mean by soothing?
Well, it could be a felt sense of feeling soothed, right, by someone's tone or their pace or just the reassurance. But also in an exam, oftentimes in an aesthetic consultation, there may be a physical exam of sorts, right? Touching of the skin and the face. And so this is where we could take the word soothing quite literally. The skin it's an amazing organ. Not only is it directly connected to, the nervous system and the brain from a way of communication, visible signs and symptoms, but through touch, actually, the skin is studded with these incredible sensory nerve endings that communicate directly with the emotional regulation centers of the brain. Yeah. And so we learn safety in utero through touch, through the amniotic fluid that, the lanugo hairs on the surface of the skin to skin contact when we come out after postpartum, and then growing up, right? The skin is where someone either touched you with care or maybe with aggression, or didn't touch you at all, or was unwelcome touch. So I think this is also an important thing, because you are laying your hands on someone. It's not just what you're touching, their face or pulling, it's how you touch. So many of these individuals, they're already scrutinizing their skin. They're looking at their skin of what to fix, to pull, to criticize. And so again, through our communication verbally, our nonverbal communication, our presence, and also how we actually examine them, You don't have to massage or caress, but intentionally laying your hands to not feel rushed, to feel like a secure, being held in a way that's appropriate with consent, of course. But we can convey a lot through the power of touch. And I think that's really important, especially in a clinical experience where you are examining someone consistently. That is part of the process.
Absolutely appreciate that. I have a very interesting question just as a follow-up. How do you use this understanding to support a patient's ability to make an informed decision without turning nervous system awareness into another persuasion technique?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. And because this is a experience that happens outside our conscious awareness, right? Without saying a word, someone's, surveillance system, like our nervous system is like our personal surveillance system. It's constantly scanning for cues of threat and danger all the time. No matter what you say, if it's not also, coupled with presence and the pace and the processing, you won't be able to persuade them anyway, right? So this isn't a sleight of hand thing. This is a felt experience that is already happening outside the individual's conscious awareness. So you can't really manipulate it in a way, but you can support them to have a positive experience with you.
And that's what we all want for our clients, a positive experience, an exceptionally positive experience. We're going to take a brief pause here. And when we return, I want to move from understanding the problem to what a practice can actually do about it. So, it's interesting that as an industry, we spend an enormous amount of time talking about the treatment plan and very little time examining the 7 or 10 minutes before it, the period in which the patient is deciding whether they trust the practice enough to continue the conversation. A similar problem happens on the marketing side. Many practices are investing heavily in advertising and generating patient interest, but they are quietly losing on prospective patients somewhere between the first search, the website, the follow-up process, the way the offer is framed, and the moment the patient arrives at the practice. So if you're listening in and wondering where your own patient journey may be breaking down, in collaboration with Business of Aesthetics, Echo Marketing is offering our listeners a complimentary 60-minute strategy session. Their team will help you examine where your practice may be losing potential patients and begin mapping out a clearer growth strategy for the next 12 months. There is no obligation, just a practical conversation about your numbers, your patient journey, and the opportunities you may be overlooking. Visit businessaesthetics.org/MSM. I'll repeat that one more time. businessaesthetics.org/MSM to reserve a time. Dr. Barr, let's get back into it. Now we've laid out the problem. The appointment structure itself can begin working against the provider before the treatment recommendation is ever presented. Let's make this practical. So, if a practice wanted to begin supporting a patient's nervous system in the room tomorrow, what would that actually sound like or look like in terms of pacing, language, and behavior?
Yeah, I would say it needs to start before they even get into the exam room. I mean, it has to be the entire life cycle of that patient moving through your practice, from the scheduling, from the front desk, to the assistant who places them in the room, to the actual consultation, right? And this is where the onus doesn't fall, like the responsibility isn't just on the one provider. It's a culture that is created inside the practice, and it doesn't just support, bottom line and revenue. Actually, when we attend and attune to our nervous systems and how our bodies are responding and our stress levels and all of that. Stress is, a natural part of life. We're wired to adapt to it. But It creates a more pleasant and productive work environment for everybody. So every step of the way has to help that individual coming for a consultation. Again, a felt sense of safeness, a felt sense of being seen, heard, understood, valued, validated in their experience. So I think that's important too, that it's not just once you get in the exam room, it's creating
And
the whole.
who
Yeah, I was just going to say, even in your waiting room of how it's set up, because part of how our nervous system is constantly taking in information, it's sensory information, our five senses, right? Sight, sound, smell, touch, taste. But it's also, interoception, what's happening inside my body, right? The textures and our body determines, the nervous system determines those cues of safety. Answering that question, am I safe? Those cues that are coming in go to the midbrain. Yeah. So it's like that also has to do with proprioception, where we are in space. So the comfort of the seats, the evenness of the table, how quick and down, up and down it goes. So all these little things, again, these are details that create an environment that supports the individual's system's stress response. So not everything has to be like just your spoken word or your presence. It's kind of how the whole clinic is set up as well.
who is responsible for that culture?
I would say the founders of the practice and the people that they hire. I mean, I think there's that saying, right? The 5 people you surround yourself with says a lot about you. So culture is really important. If you want to create a world-class experience and help people feel their best, and it's not just looking their best, right? Because I know plenty of people who have had aesthetic procedures done. They look amazing. You ask them how they feel, they're anxious. They still have that negative self-talk. Having the procedure didn't change anything for them. So really the transformation is to have them look and feel, right, in sync. And part of that, a big part of that is the culture of the practice, to hire the people who are as vested in those outcomes
Mhm.
as you are.
I love that. Because when we're thinking about the field sort of things, right? I mean, in the aesthetic industry, we're talking about more of PRPs, HRTs, that sort of thing. Rarely do we talk about the communication, right? How the practice made them feel. The outcome looks amazing, but what if you can play that part in making it feel amazing? Is there? I mean, your example was perfect, just showing a genuine difference. And if even if the outcome is great aesthetically, internally, it can differ. Um, Now, Dr. Barr, how do you make something this personal, a provider's ability to recognize and respond to a patient's nervous system, and teach it across an entire team? How do you prevent it becoming a soft skill that disappears as soon as the schedule becomes tight?
Yeah, I think it's consistency, right? Reinforcement. I think, I didn't learn this on my own. I had to take trainings. I now train other people. Like we have to do it. It is a practice, just like the practice of aesthetics. There is a practice for practicing presence. Like that is a core part of it. And so I know there are some teams, especially in the OR, they do a huddle before they do the procedure, right? Taking a mindful moment, right? We're kind of getting everyone on the same page. We're slowing things down, creating an environment that's conducive to, you know, supporting the process at hand, helping someone feel safer, secure, hopefully help us pay attention with intention, fewer mistakes. So I think it's something that is, it is a practice to be done day in, day out, and reset before every patient, right? And it doesn't take long. Literally, you can see like it's instinctive for me to place a hand, because the power of touch is so significant, right? Just letting you know, like, all right, we're behind in schedule. That interaction didn't go the way I wanted to, but I've got a hand on me saying, like, I got you. It's okay, right? We have to remind our own nervous system, like, it's all right. In this moment, you're all right. Let's reset, shake it off if we need to. Let's go into the next room, right? So that you walk into that next room and you're ready for whatever happens next. We are wired to adapt to stress. Stress is always going to happen. Running a practice, an aesthetic process, a cash paid like that is a lot of stressors happening all at once, a lot of moving parts. So it's just consistency of practice. Like nothing, resilience isn't always like the bounce back and always staying calm. Regulation isn't about calm. It's how quickly and with how much ease can you return to your homeostasis, right? We are going to get anxious. We are going to potentially shut down, but it's that awareness of, okay, I just noticed. I just noticed that I was there. How can I bring myself back so I can show up for my employees? I can show up for this client in front of me, that I can show up for myself. So it's a practice on purpose. You don't have to get this perfect. You don't have to overhaul everything, but we very rarely pay attention to our breath, to the pacing of our voice, to whether our shoulders are up at our ears all the time, right? And letting them down, right? It's these simple things that we forget how impactful they are in establishing an environment for better relationships to be fostered, which turns into patients who want to move forward oftentimes, or who feel satisfied. Because even if the result isn't technologically perfect, things happen, adjustments need to be made, they feel held and they feel taken care of, and they're going to come back to see you.
There we go. Better relationships, better business. That's what we want at the end of the day. And honestly, Dr. Barr, as you were mentioning that, I also tried to, put my hand over my heart and just feel that, honestly, it felt good. But right for a second there, right, I took a breath. I also felt immensely vulnerable. Like, you're also there, and but it later on, as you mentioned, all the great benefits, I also felt it, right? I felt a little bit more of my breathing. I felt those shoulders are stiff, so let me relax them a little bit. And as I was doing that, you were just saying it, right? What do you have to say about that vulnerability that a provider or anyone in the practice as staff members might feel if they were to put their hand over their chest just to catch a breather, because we're not a culture that appreciates weakness.
Yeah, well, I think that's a culture shift that needs to happen. Yeah, to name and normalize. We all struggle. We're human. And if putting a hand over your chest isn't what feels right for you, you don't have to do that. I teach so many different techniques that you can use. No one would even know you're doing it, to be able to
Mm.
support yourself and help to regulate. This just happens to be a go-to for me. Touch isn't always accessible or um, feel okay for some people. That's not a problem either. There are many different techniques that you can use to support yourself. And that vulnerability, right? Brene Brown, like, vulnerability is courage. If you can say, like, I'm feeling a little uptight, I'm feeling a little stressed, I'm feeling a little bit anxious about this. What are you noticing? Sometimes it gives someone permission to be like, oh my God, I thought you would never ask. Like, can we just take a minute? I think that's the biggest shift is we pathologize everything. And a human experience is very complex. It's normalizing. Of course, you may feel anxious at times. Of course, you might feel angry. I would hope you do. All emotions are welcome. And I think in an aesthetic practice where there's inherent vulnerability of telling someone, I don't like this about myself, to then be received by someone to say, all right, well, tell me a little bit more about that. What about it don't you like? What are you hoping that if we do this will change? That lets you know, okay, maybe do they have a therapist? Do they need to work through this first? So you can be honest with what your scope of practice is and the benefits and the transformation that you can offer, because it might be a both and. Oftentimes it is a both and, knowing who this clientele is, right? We all should be in therapy for the most part, right? We all can benefit from having a safe, supportive other to help us feel that we're okay and we're doing the best we can. So that vulnerability is, I think, to be celebrated.
I think so too. And we have arrived at the end of our session here, Dr. Barr. Where can our listeners learn more about you and your work?
Yeah, so I do a lot of speaking. So I think, through my keynotes and workshops that I offer, but on social media, LinkedIn and Instagram are places where I'm spending a little bit more time to share this. It's a very different perspective than what we learned in dermatology and aesthetics, but it's really important, really translating the science of autonomic science and interpersonal biology to really help clinicians build trust, strengthen relationships, and ultimately improve outcomes.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Keira Barr. And before you go, if you're looking for a greater clarity around the marketing and growth side of your practice, Echo Marketing is offering our listeners a complimentary 60-minute strategy session, an opportunity to look closely at your current patient journey, identify where prospective patients may be falling off, and map out a more focused strategy for the next 12 months. Visit businessofesthetics.org/MSM to reserve your session. I'll repeat that one last time, businessofesthetics.org/MSM. Dr. Barr, thank you so much for your time, your expertise, and for giving our audience such a thoughtful and practical way to look at the patient experience.